onto our website at igbatt.com. And then once you get there, there's a link and you can go to our new page. We're kind of doing some updates, which, it's still in the works, a work in progress, but we're excited about it. So again, this is It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach. For those who don't know us, we provide information and support while encouraging hope and faith. Myself and along with other team of advocates. We are a faith-based organization. We believe in Jesus Christ and Him crucified. We believe that He rose from the dead. We believe that He is here to save, heals, and delivers. And we also believe in the Word of God. We believe that Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, will heal in how He chooses to. He will deliver how He chooses to. And it is our job to yield to Him in the way He takes us, not the way we feel that we should go or how things should go. Again, this is It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. Please log on to our website at www.igbatt.com. You can email us at igbatt1@AOL.com, or go to our website at igbatt.com and hit the link and send us a message. Today, I really wanted to talk specifically to people who either you're been diagnosed with a severe and persistent mental illness, or you are a loved one or a family member of someone with a severe and persistent mental illness. Really want to talk to those two people, you two people today in particular. Of course, this is for anybody, but really particular to these two groups of people. What is a severe and persistent mental illness? Of course, everyone will say, every disease is severe and persistent. But the term severe and persistent mental illness or severe mental illness is actually a term developed by the federal government, and it actually speaks to a certain group of illnesses that are so severe and so persistent that they are long-lasting. They take up all aspects of an individual's life. They tend to not to be sporadic. They tend to, many times start when a person is younger, and then it stays with them all their lives. Sometimes a person might be better, sometimes it might be worse. It comes in episodes. Some people may have to take medications the rest of their lives. Some people may not. Medications may change over time. But when you're talking about severe and persistent mental illnesses, we're talking those illnesses that are so severe that they impact all aspects of an individual's life. What does that mean? In school, you may have challenges in school. You may have challenges in relationships. You may have challenges, just wherever you are. So again, we're talking about severe and persistent mental illnesses. To include, what do those include? The definitions or the diagnosis included in that definition may vary from state to state, but one of the ones that are in all of them, we're talking about schizophrenia. Okay, we're talking bipolar, and when we talked earlier in some of the earlier broadcasts, we talked about the term psychosis, being psychotic. What does that mean? When a person is psychotic or having a psychosis, that means they're out of touch with reality. That's what that means. Psychosis, you're psychotic, you're out of touch with reality. There are several diseases in which a person can be out of touch with reality, or they can be psychotic. The symptoms of several diseases can be psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar, severe persistent, severe depression, for example. A person can have that psychotic, can be out of touch with reality. So again, psychosis itself is not necessarily this psychotic disorder, but psychosis itself doesn't necessarily mean that the person has schizophrenia or bipolar or anything like that. It can be. So you have psychosis. Let me back up. So the term psychosis, when you hear people on the newscasters saying this person was psychotic, that means they were out of touch with reality. And there could be several reasons or diseases that could contribute to a person being out of touch with reality. Schizophrenia is one of them. Bipolar is one of them. Substance abuse is one of them. So there's a couple of diseases in which that could happen, right? So when you talk about schizophrenia itself is a separate category. It's a diagnosis, right? Schizophrenia, bipolar, severe depression, all of these things when you talk about severe and persistent mental illness. Today I wanted to share a word, persistence. Our word for today is persistence. And I'm taking this from the dictionary online. Firm or obstinate Oxford dictionaries, give them their credit. Firm or obstinate continuance in a course of action in spite of difficulty or opposition. Firm or obstinate continuance in a course of action in spite of difficulty or opposition. Okay? It is the action or fact of persisting. The quality or state of being persistent. Okay? It is the action or fact of persisting. I think the word that I want to focus on is the continuance in a course of action in spite of difficulty or opposition. When you're living with someone, whether they can be your husband, wife, child, aunt, uncle, or a loved one, who is living with a severe and persistent mental illness, or you yourself are living with a severe and persistent mental illness, there comes a point in your illness where you are going to have to be persistent. Okay, you will have to be persistent. And even in your persistence, you may not get the outcome that you expect. Just recently, a friend of mine, her son, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, recently killed himself. He jumped out of a window. And it was really devastating for all of us. But when you look at, and I wish I brought the obituary because I wanted to read it, but this was a young man jumped out of the window. He had been psychotic, out of touch with reality for a while. Okay? Now this is why you have to be persistent. You have to be persistent because there is one of the hallmarks or one of the symptoms of a severe and persistent mental illness is that a person doesn't know that they're necessarily sick. Right? They don't necessarily know that they're out of touch with reality in that moment. Because in that moment, whatever they're going through is real for them at that moment. So when you talk about one of the symptoms of psychosis or one of the symptoms of a person having schizophrenia, say for example, untreated schizophrenia, is auditory hallucinations. It could be auditory hallucinations or visual hallucinations. Let's just say hallucinations, delusions. Okay? Delusions have to do with the way a person thinks. I always tell people to think about it like this. When you try to figure out what a delusion is, think of the word D-M-I-N-D, mind, just D goes together. Just you attribute it that way. So a delusion, a person have a lot of different types of delusions. Delusion has to do with the way a person thinks, right? I think that I'm married to the president. I think that I am the Queen of England. I think that people are out to get me. I think that, I live a certain place, right? That has to do with the mind, delusions. When you talk about hallucinations have to do with the senses. And there are 5 senses, right? So hallucinations can impact any of those senses, right? A person can have an auditory hallucination where you hear things. You can feel like somebody's crawling on you. You can have tactile. You can have smell. So when you're talking about psychosis, one of the hallmarks or the symptom of psychosis is an auditory hallucinations or delusions, not necessarily auditory, even though auditories tend to be more common, but hallucinations or delusions, right? So when a person is in the midst of their psychosis, whatever the cause of the psychosis, whether it was because of schizophrenia, whether because of a drug that they took, or bipolar, whatever it is, or even a disease, okay? At that moment, they're out of touch with reality. They are not reasoning with you. They're not seeing things the way you see things, right? And so think about it. If I think that people are out to get me, or if I think that I really have an urgent message for the president and I must go to tell him this, no one is going to stop me because in my mind I must go tell the president this particular message. No one is going to stop me. So you trying to reason with me in the midst of my psychosis is not going to help any of us because it's not going to work because I'm not going to believe you. I'm going to know I need to talk to the president because I have a message for him, right? So when you looking at untreated mental illnesses, so when you talk about untreated mental illnesses, because mental illnesses are treatable with the right medications, with the right treatment, these illnesses, just like any other disease, can be treated. It can be treated to the point where a person may not have any symptoms, or little symptoms, or sporadic symptoms, or they might have cycles, or they may live with them the rest of their lives, but it'll be manageable. Well, a lot of times when people tell me when it comes to taking their medications, for example, they'll say that the voices may be like at a murmur or like at a whisper, or they come and go, particularly when a person is under stress. So anyway, but persistence. Now I want to stay with that particular word for a minute. We have to be persistent, because when you're dealing with someone when in the middle of their psychosis or psychotic episode, part of the symptoms of being psychotic, or one of the symptoms, is not necessarily thinking that you're sick. It's not about being stubborn. It's not about the person just doesn't, see it your way. They really don't believe it. And there's a word that I'm going to share that I can never pronounce it, but I'm going to share it as it goes on, because it's actually a term for it when a person doesn't feel that they need to take their medications. If you go on my website, igbatt.com, you should be able to find it, a whole article there. But so again, they don't believe that they need to take medication. That's when you, as a loved one, as the friend, as a concerned citizen, or whatever the case is, when you're going to have to step in and help. I always say it like this: if a person was bleeding on the street, your loved one was bleeding on the street, you just walk away, unless it was if it was in fact a loved one, somebody that you really loved. You wouldn't really just walk away, right? You would kind of I wanted to look up something real share with you. You wouldn't just walk away. You would do something about it. So what happens is, when a person's in a psychotic episode, sometimes we just walk away. We think the person is reasoning the way we're reasoning. Oh, well, if they wanted treatment, they'll get treatment. They're not bothering anybody. So we walk past our family and friends. We're not persistent until things get really bad. And you've heard me say over and over again that if your loved one requires police involvement, then the system has failed. Right? I've said this over and over again, and I certainly believe that, because what you're saying is that things have gotten so bad that no one has not paid any attention, that this person has not been in treatment, something failed, something didn't go right, that the police are the first responders. The police should not have to come to respond to a crisis, a psychiatric emergency. Right? Especially when you're talking about a person who's been diagnosed with an illness for a long period of time. It's just like if you had hypertension, or diabetes. You have diabetes. You have to manage your symptoms. You have to take, I see some people have juice and some people have peppermints, whatever it is that you have to have, and you have to take your medications on a regular basis. You manage it. Well, just like you manage your diabetes, you have to manage your mental health symptoms. If you have diabetes and the paramedics have to show up to your house, they're usually showing up because maybe you didn't take your medication on time, or you didn't eat when you were supposed to. It's something that went wrong, or maybe you might need a medication adjustment. It's the same thing there when you're talking about when a person with a mental illness. Before a person has a psychotic episode, unless you're talking about maybe something related to substance where it was immediate or something like that. But before a person has a psychotic episode, or a person has a relapse, there's a period of time. There are signs and symptoms that indicate that this person was going towards a relapse. So the question was, were we persistent? What did we do? So we have to be persistent. So going back to my friend and her son, a sweet kid, just a sweet kid, it is 24. With him, it was one of these things where he didn't necessarily feel like he needed help. He didn't necessarily feel like he was sick. And the further he got into his psychosis, the more and more he believed that. And it was hard. It was hard to get him into treatment. His mother had to be persistent, right? Had to take him, had to make the phone calls, had to do things even when he didn't feel like it. Now, there are a lot of things that's right without the mental health system in America, but there are a lot of things that could be better. I'm not going to say that could be wrong, but there's a lot of things that's wrong that could be better. Let me say that. One of the things that can be better, I think, is just when we're looking at severe and persistent mental illnesses, is getting a person into treatment. Can be difficult depending on where you live and the symptoms that the person presents with. You have to you have to be very shrewd in a sense if you have a loved one that needs treatment. Because depending on where you are, depending on the symptoms, it can be really difficult to get them in. Unfortunately, many times a person has to have a psychotic episode, or they have to have a police involvement before they can get the help that they need. And even then, it may just be short term, which is why the people who around this individual have to be persistent. You have to be persistent and say no. If you, whoever you got to call, if you got to call 100 times, if you have to be a pain in somebody's neck, so to speak, you need to do that. Because each life is precious. We want to make sure that individuals who are living with severe mental illnesses get the treatment that they need, because treatment works. We want to decrease the number of times that a person dies by suicide. The number of times that a person gets to the point where they take their life by suicide. This young man, because of his, and not just him, unfortunately, others like him, because of their voices, because of their what's going on, the psychosis, they don't even know that they're taking their life. Right? It wasn't even a conscious decision. Sometimes it's just they don't know. They don't know that at that moment that if you keep taking a nail and poking it in your eye, or keep doing this with the right vein, that you could die. Because at that moment they're so out of touch with reality. So when we talk about us from a faith-based perspective, the scripture talks about the strong must bear the infirmity of the weak. So when you look at it from the spiritual standpoint, one of the prayers that as we praying for our families, our children, our husband, our wife, the nations, absolutely, pray for those who in that very moment are who don't have the mental capacity to pray for themselves, who don't have the mental capacity to think for themselves, who don't have the mental capacity to determine right from wrong. At that moment, when we talk about dying by suicide, right now, I'm not necessarily talking to those who are depressed at that moment, because at that moment, when you talk about dying by suicide, at that moment, they don't see no other option. They see no other choice. At that moment, that is the best thing for them to do at that particular moment. But when you talk about someone with a psychotic, who is psychotic or out of touch with the reality, whether that's because of schizophrenia or whether that's because of bipolar or a drug of a substance issue, at that moment it's not rational. They're not even there at that moment. They don't see how if you keep walking keep walking, that the ledge is going to give way, that at some point you're going to run out of ledge and you're going to fall and hit the ground at that moment. So we have to pray. The strong have to bear the infirmity of the weak. Lord, look on those at this very moment don't have the wherewithal to know what's right from wrong. Who at that moment, because of the symptoms that they're dealing with, they are so engrossed with their symptoms that they don't see the reality. There is this little skit, little exercise that you can do, because some of you might say, well, at that very moment they should know at the very moment about the Lord would have done this or whatever. There is a skit. I would encourage you to kind of do it with a couple of friends. 3 of you get into a group, right? And what you want to do, 2 of you start having just a regular conversation. Whatever, just have your regular conversation, and then have the third person get in the ear of someone while you're talking, and as you're talking and having a conversation, that third person just start while the 2 of you are trying to talk. I'm telling you, I think there's maybe something on YouTube you can look at as well. It'll be an eye-opener, because what's going to happen when the 2 of you are talking and that third person is just talking in your ear, that's what it's like when you're dealing with psychosis, when you're out of touch with reality, right? And when you're talking, you're going to get irritated. If you do the exercise long enough, some people, when we've done this exercise, they've just gotten really bothered. I mean, it was really like they were really something just came over them and they were just angry. They were just triggered because of that noise in your ear. Imagine that those voices just going on in your ear. I'm trying to talk. I'm talking to you. How everybody doing? And the voice say, don't listen. And, you know what I'm saying? So it can try it. Get 3 of you in a group and try it, and you'll see a little bit of what it's like to live every day with voices in your head. And we're not talking about the thoughts that all of us have. We're talking about extraordinary. We're talking about these voices that are in your head that's heightened, that's beyond the regular voices that just keep going on, or just going on, or you can hear. It is irritating. It will drive you to do certain things. So that's what. So when you come upon when a person's dealing with psychosis or psychotic, at that moment, they're not. They're hearing. They're attuned to what's going on in their head. So think about it. If I think that you're out to get me, I'm going to respond accordingly. So many times a person who is out of touch with reality, they are more a danger to themselves than they are to other people. Now, we hear the statistics. We hear it on the news. You hear something about a person who's psychotic, maybe kills someone or does something, and that does happen. But the data lets us know that people with psychosis, they're more inclined to be the victims as opposed to the other way around. But again, persistence, okay? It's really important that as a family member, let's start there, that when you're trying to get your loved one help, that you're persistent. That you're persistent, that you know what the resources are in your area. Even if, you a friend, you want to know the resources in the area. If you have a crisis team, you want to know the number to the crisis team. You would like to know their doctor, their treatment team, where do they go with medications. You want to know as much as you can about your loved one's illness. You want to have a conversation with your loved one. Don't think just because they may not seem like they're listening that they're not listening, but they are. Because remember what I said about the voices. So sometimes it's like a delayed reaction. So if you're talking to me and I have somebody else in my head talking, it may be a few days later that I've processed everything that you said, and I come back to you and I'll say, hey, you remember when you and I, we were talking about A, B, or C? And then you're like, that was 2 days ago. Because it takes that long to process the information. Right? So sometimes you think about a person may respond. When we talk about schizophrenia, they may respond a little slow, right? They may respond a little delayed, and you may be thinking, okay, they don't get it. No, they get it. It takes time. When there's a lot going on in your head, it takes time to process all that information. But again, persistence. The word is persistence. I asked a friend of mine, one of my partners that does this with me, Minister Kelly, and I said, what would you say to family members? Right, because of her husband, and he said you got to be persistent. You have to be persistent in prayer. You have to be persistent in taking care of your own self, because it can wear on you. So if you a family member, a loved one, you have to be persistent in taking care of yourself as well. I would encourage you to make sure that you get your loved one connected with other resources so you won't be totally drained. But you have to be persistent. You can't let the fact that a person doesn't want treatment detour you. It may slow you down. You may have to wait a while, but don't let it detour you. Because what happens is the person doesn't want help. They refuse it, and the doctors, the police, the authorities, they may not necessarily be really helpful to you at that moment, because they'll say, well, if the person doesn't want to have to take their medications, they don't, which is true. If a person doesn't want treatment, they don't have to get treatment, unless they're court ordered, which is true. So in a sense, as a family member, you're left waiting for them to hit rock bottom before you can get help. That's what it seems like for a lot of family members. Hey, you guys are going to wait until my loved one does something really dangerous, then you're going to want to try to get him help. Sometimes, unfortunately, that is the case. But let me give you a little tip here. If you're a loved one, all right, and you have a family member, and he or she, you've called the crisis team, you've called the authorities in your area, and it varies. Some places have a crisis team, some don't. Unfortunately, in many places, the default is the police. 911 is the default for everything, unfortunately. So you call the police and they come out. They don't see a reason why to take your loved one, because the police are not necessarily, again, depending on the jurisdiction, are not going to take a person against their will unless there's a reason. And they're not taking their medications is not a reason for the police to get involved, right? You call their treatment team. No one picks up the phone, or you call the treatment team and no one can come out, so you're left with the person, and you're frustrated. If you call, what can I do? The word is persistent. And here's a tip: ask yourself this question: what are the consequences of this person not taking their medications? What are the consequences of this person walking around naked? whatever it is that they're doing, and the doctor or police is saying, hey, this is not really a reason to admit them. Ask yourself, what are the consequences? What are the consequences of this person walking up and down the street yelling? What are the consequences? So sometimes, because we got this thing, and everybody pretty much is trained to this term where you have to be a danger to yourself or others. And when we think about danger to yourself or others, we're very narrow with that. So as a family member, you have to be persistent and think about ways to make that less narrow, right? So you got to think about how is this a danger to this individual? And sometimes that is what you have to lead with. Because they're going to ask, will the person think about dying by suicide? Which, aka killing themselves. Just so you know, the word that we try to use now in the language, instead of saying this person killed themselves or committed suicide, we try to say die by suicide. But anyway, that's the term. So when you're saying this person died by suicide, or they're suicidal, that's what, for a lot of people, they think, well, that's a danger to themselves or others. Are they going to kill themselves, or are they going to kill someone else? And you say no. They say, well, there's nothing that we can do. No, you got to think. You think that, don't you let that word be so narrow. Okay, danger to himself or others. Your loved one is walking up and down the street cursing everybody out. That's a danger to him. Your loved one is a danger to himself, because right now, especially in 2021. With everything that's going on, somebody can punch him or her, somebody could beat him or her up, someone could, he's a danger of getting beat up, right? He's a danger of somebody shooting him if he or she says the wrong thing, okay? When you talk about not taking the medication, well, how is that a danger to himself? Everybody has a right not to take the medication. Well, my loved one is, because of his psychosis, he is so out of touch with reality. He doesn't understand that he needs to take his medications, and because he's not taking his psychosis medication, psychotic medications, he's not taking his hypertension medication, and his hypertension medication is going through the roof, and based on the numbers of his hypertension, he could die and could have a stroke. So we need to get him into the hospital. So again, you want to think about other things, okay, that can help bolster your case. Because unfortunately, you have to be persistent. Because think about it, depending on where you are, your loved one is your loved one, right? So you take your loved one, let's say you get him or her to the hospital, they're going to be evaluated. When you evaluate, you can wait a long time. Unfortunately, it really depends. It really depends. When you're talking about severe mental illness, I want you to be prepared. I mean, there's what should happen and what sometimes happens. So, okay, what should happen is one thing, but I'm preparing you for what more than likely may happen. So when this does happen, you have to be persistent. So you get there, you may have to wait a while. There may be one psychiatrist who may or may not be on site, or he or she may have to come in. There may be one or many times it's a resident, which is nothing against a resident, I'm just saying. So you may have to wait. Some hospitals, you may not, the first person you see more than likely is not going to be a psychiatrist, it's going to be a general doctor, because a lot of times they want to check you out physically to make sure everything's okay. So that's a wait, and then you have to tell your story to that individual. You have to tell your story to that nurse. Then they'll call, okay, put in a consult for somebody from psych to come down if you're in the emergency room. And again, depends on the setup. So you're waiting. You're going to have to tell your story again. And depending on the story that you tell, the psychiatrist or the person on duty, whoever the person is making the decision, may decide not to admit your loved one. So now you've gotten... you're at the house, you've had to struggle to get your loved one in the car. Now you got your loved one in the car, now you're at the emergency room, and your loved one is sitting there calmly, and the doctor is looking like, well, he or she seems fine now, and you're trying to make the case. And when you're making the case, again, you have to make the case. It can't just be, my loved one doesn't want to take his or her medications. Your loved one has a right not to take his or her medications. They have a right not to want to go to treatment. That's their right. You can't make them unless, you have a court order and they're made to do so. So again, you have to have a conversation with the doctor. And then depending on what's going on up on the floor, if that hospital That's psych. And many times the psych ward is sometimes the smallest ward. They don't have a whole lot of beds. Well, maybe not the smallest ward, but they may not have a whole lot of beds. So when you go there, and that whoever is admitting, it's like you have 12 beds, right? And it's a Friday night. And that your loved one, the doctors are really discerning, not discerning, but diagnosing, assessing, okay, your loved one at least has a place to stay, your loved one at least has somebody that can watch over him, which is you. Your loved one at least is kind of sitting there calmly. We'll probably just give him or her some medications and let them go home. If you feel that's not appropriate, you have to be persistent. You have to say, no, this is the reason why I brought my loved one in. And you want to be persistent. You want to speak and say, this is why. You know, he or she's walking in the neighborhood doing this. They almost got beat up. They're about to be homeless on the street. It's cold outside. They're about to be homeless. They have no place to go. It's hot outside. They're about to be homeless. Whatever the cases that you have to make, but it has to be beyond the fact that they're not taking their medications. My loved one, Doc, has hypertension, and he hasn't been taking his medications, and da-da-da-da. I've known some family members, have been so desperate where they've had to tell, a lie. Well, has he thought about killing himself? Yes, he has. Yes, he has. And I'm not advocating that, but I'm just saying sometimes you get desperate. Right? And you say anything because you know your loved one needs to go into the hospital, or you feel that way. Well, guess what? The doctors, the psychiatrists, clinical social workers, or whoever is making the case, if they are in fact clinical in the mental health field, these people, they may not seem empathetic, but they've heard it probably before. They get it. So by just having that conversation, the doctor may right there can come up with a plan, and unfortunately you may have to take your loved one back. But if you have to take him or her back home, they might say, okay, I get it, but they know there's no beds. They know that it's a Friday night or it's early Friday, during the day, and it's about to be a whopper of a weekend, and we're trying to discharge as many people who need to go, who can go. And if your loved one is marginal, so to speak, look, let's do this. Let's go ahead, give him or her some medications, let's give them an injection. Let's observe them in the emergency room for a little while, and if they're fine, we'll let them go home. Right? So again, sometimes that happens. If that happens, you take your loved one back home, and if things don't work out, persistent, you bring your loved one back. Because see here, the goal is from the psychiatrists or from those in the mental health field, our perspective is we don't want your loved one to have to stay in the hospital forever, right? Those days are long gone. There are very few, long-term hospitals. A lot of the long-term hospitals have closed. A lot of the long-term hospitals have lowered the number of beds. There's not a lot of beds anymore, because the whole idea is for people to integrate within the community. One can argue how that has worked out, but that's the whole idea. So your loved one, so again, from a mental health standpoint, from the clinician standpoint, our thought process is, okay, your loved one can't stay here forever. So let's think about, come up with a plan. What is keeping your loved one from going back home? What is the problem? What is that we can overcome it, that we can get the loved one on a good plan? The thing is, once we do that, that's done. We, the family, you as the loved one, there's persistence is going to have to kick in again once your loved one is released to follow through. Because if I'm, as the clinical social worker, set up the appointment for your loved one to be seen tomorrow at an outpatient mental health clinic or by a psychiatrist in the community, you may have to be persistent in to get your loved one to the clinic. And if your loved one doesn't want to go to the clinic, then that's when you have to call the clinic. I tell people, do it like this. If your loved one doesn't want to go to the clinic, again, there's a saying, I just can't remember, but you got to be persistent. Okay? If your loved one doesn't want to go to the clinic and there's an appointment made, you go and you show up. And they're probably going to say to you, well, look, later, we can't see you. And you got to be persistent and say, look, I have a loved one here. He is da-da-da. We were at the emergency room. He doesn't want to come, but I need help as a family member. Can you help me? What can I do? Ask them. And they may, because see, there are things that you might not think of that the clinicians or the people in your area, they may know about. They may know about peer supports. They may have a peer support person that's connected to that particular agency who will come out, to see your loved one. They may not. Resources vary. But again, you don't want to just give up. You don't want to say, just because your loved one said they don't want to go, you just give up. No, I'm going to go. Your appointment is at 10 o'clock on Monday. Well, I'm going to be going to the appointment. I'm going to sign up, and I'm going to go down there and talk to somebody and see what kind of help that we can get. And then, because what you want to do, you want to partner with the outpatient people, the outpatient clinicians, right? So again, let me back up here. I think I'm going too fast here. You want to think about the long run. If you have a loved one who is diagnosed with a severe and persistent mental illness, or you are diagnosed with severe persistent mental illness, we're not talking about a sprint. We're talking about a marathon. So that's the first thing you have to realize, that we're talking about an illness that you or your loved one may have to deal with in some form the rest of your life. That's number two. You have to get that. You have to settle on that. Now, people say, "Oh no, Jesus and healing." I believe all of that, but healing comes in a lot of different forms, and healing could be instantly or progressively. But while you're waiting for your healing, there are things that you may need to do to get to continue to live. Jesus Christ said He has come that you might have life and life more abundantly. And that includes those who with a mental illness, that includes those who with diabetes. Just because you've been diagnosed with cancer, or you've been diagnosed with whatever you've been diagnosed with, doesn't mean that you can't live and have a life more abundantly. I tell people, there's a little saying that I got here, well, there's another one here somewhere, that you can move forward, you just may move forward slowly. Right? If both of my legs are amputated, I may not be able to run the 100-yard dash, but I may be able to wheel the 100-yard dash. See, the problem is not your diagnosis. The problem is not your symptom. The problem is how we think about it. Your symptom, your diagnosis, does not stop the plan of God for your life. What stops the plan of God for your life is when you allow it, when you look at your symptoms, when you look at your disability, when you look at your illness, and you become stuck there. When you just look at your illness and you don't think that, oh, poor me, I can never make it, that my life is over, my son will never do this. That's the problem. The problem is not God. God is not limited. So as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. You're limited. The problem is your faith. You have put our faith, your ability. So never get caught up on your symptoms. If you go to our website, or some of our other partners that we deal with, are living with mental illnesses, and they have nonprofits. They're living with schizophrenia, and they're working. They're having families, so it doesn't have to hold you back. What holds you back is your perception and how you choose to let it hold you back. Okay, but so again, number two, what did I say? Number two, you have to know that this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. You have to get that in your head. You have to come to the reality, the realization that I'm going to probably be living with symptoms the rest of my life. Maybe not as bad, maybe every now and then, but I have an illness that I have to manage. Now, once you start there, come to that realization, then you can begin to build. Then you can begin to think about recovery. Okay, then you can begin to think about recovery, not meaning the absence of symptoms, but recovery in the sense, in the midst of my symptoms, how am I going to achieve my goals? And one of the ways to achieve my particular goals may be medications, may be therapy, may be group therapy, or talking to other people, whatever the case is. Whatever it is, you need to be committed that you have to do it. So that's number one. What happens is people look at psychotic episodes in a vacuum, right? There's something behind the psychotic episode. Now, there's a reason, there's a diagnosis, there's an illness or something that's behind it. So what happens is a person has an episode or a break with reality. They go into the hospital. They're fine because they've been in the hospital, and there are medications. They come out, they're fine, they're much better. People go, phew, they're fine. And you don't follow up. You're not persistent with the medications. No one is persistent in ensuring that you follow through, right? Person get out, they're not hearing voices anymore. Their mood is better. You know, they think they're doing great. Oh, I'm fine. I can do this. So they begin to test. I call it testing the diagnosis. Right? Because when you first get the diagnosis, you know, some people are skeptical, some people don't really believe it, some people, you know, okay, maybe. But many people, the first time they get it, they'll start out good, but after a while they want to test the diagnosis. I want to see, do I really have bipolar? Do I really have schizophrenia? So they stop taking the medications. It's just like a person who is substance abuse, right? You start testing it. You start thinking, well, you know, maybe I can take one drink. I don't have to I'm looking at my time here. I don't have to. I can take one drink. Now you were an alcoholic. You had a mental health diagnosis. Not mental health diagnosis. I'm sorry, people. Just distracted here. Forgive me, forgive me. Okay, that should be good. So you were just diagnosed. You finally came to the realization that you have that you're diagnosed with a substance use disorder, right? You're going through those steps. You're admitting that you have a problem. You're getting the help, and then as time goes on, your illness starts to lie to you. So it makes you think, oh, you're doing okay. You don't need to group therapy. You don't need to go to AA meetings or NA meetings. It's the same thing happens with it when a person is diagnosed with a mental illness, right? You forget what you were like before you started taking the medications, before you got into treatment. This happens a lot. It's kind of common when you first diagnose to try to test the diagnosis, right? So people get off their medications, they relapse. They may have to have a couple of relapses before they start taking things seriously, or really realize that, wow, I do have something going on with me, right? So that's not uncommon. That happens. I think it's natural for a lot of us. Especially around younger people or people who already achieved a certain level of success. I think I can do this. Okay, I think I can do this. And then, as time goes on, you stop taking the medications. And with the medications for psychosis, mental health medications, it's not like the medication that if you take Monday, like you're supposed to take it every Monday at 4 o'clock. If you miss a day, you're automatically going to feel it, right? It's not like, I guess, with diabetes. I see where some people, if they don't take their insulin, they start having symptoms right away. It's not like that. So a person can go a long period of time and seem to be okay, right? So you could be a long period of time and not taking your medications, and no one will ever know it, or you might not feel it until a period of time. And then once we start seeing the symptoms, and by the time we start seeing the symptoms, then it's usually a problem. I'm not going to say it's too late, but it takes a while for some people to get back on track. So anyway, back to what I was saying, persistence. A lot of times people, once you have the break, things are going fine, people are not persistent. So people stop. They stop following the regimen that got them better. They stop. And they will usually stop until another episode happens, because another episode will happen. If you have an illness, you will have symptoms at some point. You may have them sooner or later than sooner, but you are going to have symptoms. So when you have the symptoms, that's when people now want to go back. This was why you see many times the police will have to follow up with a crisis, right? Because the person wasn't persistent with their treatment, and they stopped taking their medications. Their family members didn't notice, because the family members, many times the person's doing fine, or they're doing fine without their medications. Everybody can sleep in the house. We have peace. They're not walking up and down the street yelling at the neighbors. Thank God, he or she, they're doing great. And they don't understand that it was because of the medications while they were doing great. They were doing great because they got on track. But now, because they're no longer on track, and it's over a period of time, that these behaviors are going to start up again eventually, and now you're back where you started, and sometimes you're worse off than where you were before, and you have to start all over again. And that's really hard, and that's really kind of sad to see, but sometimes it does happen. So again, you have to be persistent. You have to really take the mental illnesses seriously, and seriously in the sense as far as your management. You have to know that this is something that you have to manage, or I have to manage. If I'm the person with diagnosed or family members, that you got to pay attention to. And sometimes, especially as a parent, you may have to help your child learn how to manage it for a little while, until they become better at, but until they buy into it. And then unfortunately, that's, That's the job of a parent, right? It's just like when you potty training your kid, or you're teaching them how to tie their shoe. You may have to do it for a while and reteach it and teach it and reteach it for a while until they get the hang of it. It's the same thing, unfortunately, with severe mental illnesses. You may have to really be active in your child's life for a while, and it may be an older child, and you may not feel like you have to tell a 23-year-old, 24-year-old child, that they should be more, they should get it. But sometimes it's not the case. Understand, when we talk about a severe mental illness, it may not cognitively, it may not necessarily, they may not be able to do it. So you may have to do it for them, and that's persistence until they can get the hang of it. But as a family member, you don't want to do everything. Again, this is a long term. This is a marathon. So the goal is that you want to surround your loved one, your child, family member, with other people who are dealing with the same thing that he or she is dealing with, that they can begin to learn how to deal with their illness or manage it from their peers. Because again, you may not be around all the time, and they have to know that they have to take their medications. Anyway, same thing on the other shoe, on the other foot. If you're living with a mental illness, it's important for you to know how to manage your illness. It's important for you is to take things seriously. You can't be selfish, because you have to realize that your loved one may not be around all the time. Your loved one has a right to have a life. Your loved one has a right to sleep in peace. They have a right not to be afraid of you. Many times people will say, I'm doing fine. Like, I've had people will tell me, I'm fine, I'm not taking my medications, and that's fine. I'm okay. But then the question is, how are the other people around you doing? You're fine, you're not taking your medications, but if you're walking up and down and you're not sleeping and you're waking up the entire house, you may be fine, everybody else isn't. So again, it's something to think about. Persistence. When you're living with a severe mental illness, whether you're a family member, loved one, or the person who is diagnosed with it, you have to be persistent. You got to be persistent in getting treatment. Like I was sharing before about the hospital, right? You get your person to the loved one to the hospital, or you get to the hospital. There may not be no beds, so you may have to wait, or they might send you home. Okay, you may have to make up a story so they can make you so worse than what you are, so you can get admitted, because you feel like you got to get admitted. Personally, I think if someone wants to be admitted to the psych ward for help, they should be admitted. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, because the goal, as I was sharing before, is to get people okay. The goal is not necessarily to admit a person if you don't need it. So on one side, we want to get you into the hospital so we can get better. And then on the other side, we want that. But at the same time, if you can get better by using the community resources, that's better. That's even better. We don't want you to be dependent on the inpatient. We want you really to kind of latch on or to connect with your community resources, because you're going to spend more time in the community than you are going to be on an inpatient. But sometimes you do need to go inpatient. Sometimes when you're looking at a crisis, an active psychosis episode, or you might need your medication adjusted, you may need to go into the hospital. But here is the best thing to do as a family member or loved one, right? Make sure you connect with your outpatient treatment team, your outpatient psychiatrist, your outpatient clinical social worker. Because here's the thing, if you or if your loved one are starting to have an episode or starting to feel unwell, they can help you get in. They can help you. Your psychiatrist, if you're starting to feel unwell, he or she may be able to start doing some medication adjustments. You can have a conversation, right, about your medications. And I tell people, when you go to see a psychiatrist, and some people joke about this, and I think it's all with all doctors. Unfortunately, there are not a whole lot of psychiatrists, and sometimes they're busy. But I tell people, when you sit down with your psychiatrist and he or she asks you how you're doing, they really don't mean, for you to tell them about how you went to Macy's and you got a sale and you guys had a barbecue. No, you got 15 minutes, right? And you got to think like this. I got 15 minutes. When you go in and ask you how you're doing, they're asking you about your mental health symptoms, not about anything else per se. That's nice to hear, but many psychiatrists are not therapists as well. They're not psychiatrists/therapists, and especially in the community mental health settings. This is not, and again, I'm not It varies depending on where you live. It varies with the psychiatrist. Some psychiatrists are. But many times in community mental health settings, that psychiatrist is not a psychiatrist slash therapist. That psychiatrist is not going to spend a whole hour with you, right? Because many times there are not a whole lot of psychiatrists. That psychiatrist, when he or she comes to that particular clinic, they may have other clinics that he or she is going to, maybe not. But when they come, I can tell you, they may have 25 people scheduled in one day, and they're rolling. They're rolling. And you may say, oh, wow, that sounds really bad, but sometimes that is the reality. Okay? Again, I'm telling you what may happen so you can build up your persistence, so you can be aware, not necessarily what should happen or what happens in your case. You might say, my psychiatrist would talk to me all the time. That's great. That's great if you're in that area. But I can tell you, in the clinic that I'm at, and some of my colleagues, psychiatrists come, they're rolling. They're rolling. So what am I saying? I want you to know that. So when you sit down and talk with that psychiatrist, you're going to have to be persistent, all right, to make sure to get his or her attention. And when they ask you how you doing, okay, doc, let me pull out my piece of paper and say, no, I'm not doing well. You have to have a conversation. Many times people will say, I went to see the psychiatrist, and he or she asked me the same questions every time. What did they ask you? You feel like killing yourself? Anything? They go through the crisis questions. They never asked me anything else. He didn't even ask me about da 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 da. And my thing was, well, did you tell him? Well, no, he didn't ask. No, you have to tell him. Because when he asked you how you were doing, that was your moment. That started the clock, in a sense, right? And if you don't have nothing to talk about, how you doing on your medications? I'm doing okay. Any thoughts of harm, danger? Oh, I'm fine, da-da-da. Okay, da-da-da. Okay, and okay. How'd you do on the medications? Let me see. I gave you a 30-day script. Okay, here's a 30-day script. Here you go. Thank you. You're like, hey, that was fast. That was your moment. You have to stop right there. Well, Doc, I have some questions about my medication. How are you doing? Doc, I don't know if I want to take these medications for the rest of my life, because I feel like this. You got to have a conversation with your psychiatrist. You have to have that conversation. The psychiatrist is the only one that's going to be able to prescribe the medications that you need, make adjustments to the medications, right? Now, again, and I'm talking about in the clinic, when you talk about a clinical social worker, it's around therapy. We don't prescribe medications unless a person is dually licensed or whatever. But generally, it's a psychiatrist. So you have to have that conversation. You as a loved one, one of the things that you want to make sure you do when your loved one goes to see their psychiatrist or clinical team, you want to go at least one time and ensure that your name is on that paper as a contact, as an authorized contact. You want to make sure that the clinic has the ability to contact you if they need to, and you have the ability to call and speak to somebody if you need to. You want to make sure you sign those forms so that when you talking to your loved one, or if your loved one, you start noticing something different, you can talk to the doctor as well, or talk to the clinical team and say, hey, he hasn't been sleeping. I've noticed this. You want to have a conversation. So see, again, when you look at the police showing up to handle a crisis, or you want to look at a person having to go into the hospital, that's at the end of it. There were a lot of things that happened before that person got to this point, right? If the outpatient treatment was in place and it was active and it was proper, you could decrease the problem here. So at the end here, the spectrum, you have the police, you have the ambulance showing up and taking a person to the hospital, or the person having to be admitted, right? The whole crisis, a person is actively psychotic. If we would have handled it here, you wouldn't have got here. The problem is we're not persistent here. Right? Here is where you have to be persistent. Here is where you have to be active in the treatment, in the outpatient treatment. Here is where you have to ask about the medication. Here is where you have to have a conversation with your psychiatrist. I don't like these medications. If you don't like taking pills, there are IMs. There are shots that you can take. Monthly shots, right? Injections that you can take. So that way you don't have to take medication every day. But again, you have to have a conversation. If you really truly don't like the medications and you feel like you're taking too much, you can have a conversation with the doctor about how to titrate down or make some changes. But here, the problem is that we're not persistent here at the beginning. We wait until there's a crisis. And then what happens when there's a crisis, which could be a good thing, it was once now there's a crisis. Now you're admitted to the hospital. Now the police have come, have taken you, the crisis team. You can start again. You can start fresh. And when I mean fresh, now you can get back on the medications. Now you can get back into an outpatient treatment. Now you can get an appointment. So you can start fresh. But again, you have to be persistent. You can't just get complacent. And that's what happens. People just get complacent many times and you don't follow through. We got to follow through. We have to be persistent. You have to be persistent in getting the help that we need. And then once we get the help, we have to be persistent in managing our own symptoms. If you're living with a mental illness, you have to be persistent in managing those. You have to be persistent in being able to ask for help if you need it. If you don't know, reaching out for resources. As a family member, as a loved one, you have to be persistent in these things, right? But again, by the time the police show up, we like to blame the police. They should handle this. They should handle this better. And there's always room for improvement, right? But the question is, it's not so much that the police should have handled it better. Why did the other people along the way, why you guys didn't handle it better? The person who called the police, you live with your family member. So why didn't you handle it better? Why did it take the police? You know your family members. Why didn't you make the call? Why didn't you reach out? Who's the treatment team? Where do they go for treatment? What are the medications that they take? So again, there's enough blame to go around. But what I'm saying is, and encouraging people, especially those of us who are Christians, is that believers, we have to know that we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility in the sense we can't put everything on God. We have a responsibility, right? You can't. Faith without works is dead. You can have faith that you're going to get healed, that your loved one will never take any medications again, or that you don't have to take any medications. You can have that, but you have to put some works in place. You have to work at knowing what your illness is, knowing your diagnosis. You have to put some work in taking the medications until you are delivered, right? You don't want to get into a point and think that pride, let me say this, pride keeps a person from getting help. It is not the fact your faith. You have a false faith, right? How is it you're going to have so much faith for healing and you don't have enough? Now, all of a sudden, when it comes to schizophrenia or severe mental illness, you have just so much faith. Not necessarily even for you, but for other people. They need to just pray more. You got all this faith. They need to pray more. They need to fast more. I need to do this. And maybe they read their word. All of those things are great, right? But if there's certain, let me say this. All of those things are great, okay? You have all of this mouth, all of this, what people should do. You got all of this about how it should go down and how it should go and blah, 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 blah. You got all of this, right? But why is it that you don't have enough faith, right, to take care of your own problems? You got all this faith for somebody else and what they should do, but why is it you don't have enough faith that your children go in and out of the penitentiary, in and out of jail? Where's your faith, right? So the thing is, we believe God, quote unquote, but there's no congruency. Thoughts, feelings, and behaviors have to align. You can't say you have great faith if you only have it in one area, and you have it in an area that is not even, you have all this great faith, but it's only in one area. Yeah, you have great faith to tell people that they shouldn't take medications, or you let the enemy trick you into thinking that God is going to do it. God don't have to do anything. Okay, we don't tell him what to do. We pray in accordance to his word. The highest form of faith is actually trust. The highest form of faith is when we can believe that God knows the way that we take and that he's heard our prayer. The highest form of faith is resting in him and saying, Lord, this is not the way I hoped I would go. I thought things would be better by now, but you know and you see. Right? You know my desires, and I'm going to trust you, Father, that you know better than I do. You know better than I. You know how this is going to go, right? You knew that I was going to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. You knew my child was going to be diagnosed with bipolar. You knew I was going to have this particular illness. You knew it before I knew it, right? And and in the middle of my illness, you're still saying that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. You're still saying that you've called me for a purpose. It may not be the purpose I think or I thought, but you called me for a purpose. That's what we have to rest in. See, a lot of times we have this false, it's nothing but pride. It's nothing but pride. We have this pride, arrogance. When you don't accept the will of God, you are what He's doing, then you are full of pride and full of arrogance, and you make it seem like you're full of faith, and it's really not faith. It really isn't. Because when you get to the point where you think you know better than how He does, then that's a problem, right? So what am I saying? A lot of people will have, say they're diagnosed with an illness, for example, and they'll pray for healing. And you should pray for healing. But once you finish praying for healing, you have to rest in the timing. And it's a struggle. It can be a battle going back and forth with that, right? Because no one wants to be sick, right? No one wants to be sick. But once you rest in it, you get a revelation of how you can move forward. God will give you a strategy or a plan to move forward, to live a life more abundantly in the midst of hearing the voices. He'll show you how to live and how to manage what it is that you have to manage. But if you're still fighting the fact that you have an illness, you still trying to, do it your way, then you never get to that point where the peace of God, you never be able to walk into the rest where God can tell you what the plan He has for your life and give you a revelation and can give you strategies. Because there's a strategy for everything that we face. Okay, there's a strategy, there's a plan, there's a way out. You just lost your job. God, what is the plan? What is the strategy? My rent is due. What do I need to do? And when you ask Lord, you got to be humble enough to yield to what He's telling you to do. He may tell you, okay, knock on your neighbor's door and tell them you just lost your job and ask them if they can help you. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. Well, you don't know that your neighbor just hit the lottery. And don't want nobody to know. But he just hit the lottery. And when you go ask, he going to like, oh, shoot. He going to give it to you. You don't know that person was praying. At the same time you're praying and say, Lord, you know what? I'm not going to be selfish. If somebody come and knock on my door and ask me for some money, I'm going to give them $5,000. But you over there full of pride. Now, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And you miss your blessing. And because you want God to do it your way. Okay, God heal me. A lot of times when people get it, especially in we talk about mental illness, because people don't understand that the brain can become sick just like any other organ. And when the brain becomes sick, it impacts thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, right? So we don't understand that, or we don't really grasp that. So what happens is we start, oh, something is wrong with me. I'm weird. I'm different. And you are different. There is something going on with you. And people stand that you may be weird. But here's the thing. You're God's weirdo. You're God's special person. Yes, something wrong with me, but God still loves me. And the fact that you're weird, that you're a weirdo, that something is wrong with you, that you think that your life looks like you're never going to amount to anything, that has nothing to do. That does not invalidate the God's plan for your life. He doesn't feel that way because when He created you with all those little quirks and everything. He knew you would hear voices. Okay, He knew you would be special. He knew that you would sometimes hear things and think things that weren't true. He knew all of that, but yet He still said you're fearfully and wonderfully made. What happens is the atmosphere around us, whether it's other people or our own feelings, will beat us up because we're not as like other people. We're different. Because we're different, we beat ourselves up because we're different. Because I hear voices, because I'm depressed, or because I'm whatever it is that you're dealing with, right? Because anytime you are different, there is a tendency to not feel like other people. You do feel like something is wrong with you. You do feel like, well, maybe, hey, what went wrong? You're in a special class in school. That tells you that you're different. You're in a slow whatever, you're the slowest group or whatever, you feel different. And whenever you feel rejected, so you start internalizing that. But no, you don't want to, when you feel rejected, you feel different, right? And you start internalizing that, and you start thinking that something is wrong with you. And you have to say, yes, there is something wrong with you. If I was able to give a close-up, I would say to you, yes, you are, there is something wrong with you. You were rejected because there's something wrong with you. You were bullied because there was something wrong with you. You're different because there's something wrong with you. What else would people say to ourselves? You're never going to amount to nothing. And the reason why you're never going to amount to nothing, because you're different and there's something wrong with you. You know what's wrong with you? Okay, what else do people say? All those things that we say. Yes, there is something wrong with you. You got a lot wrong with you. There's something wrong with you. I'm going to tell you what is wrong with you. What is wrong with you, the problem is that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. That is what's wrong with you. And because you're fearfully and wonderfully made, because see, God, the extra grace that He has to give you, that's what's wrong with you. You got that extra grace on you. You got that extra ability. Right? Grace is not just unmerited favor, but it's the ability of God. Because you got all of these quirks and all these problems with you, right? You're different. There's something wrong with you. And what's wrong with you is that you got an extra chromosome of grace, God's ability. And the enemy doesn't want you to know this. Right? He wants you to look at the fact that you're different, that you're a weirdo as a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Yeah, I'm a weirdo. I'm different. I stutter. I'm not as good looking. I'm fat. I'm skinny. I'm short. Whatever your problem is, whatever your thing is, we all got something, right? That makes us feel that we're different and not like other people. Whatever your thing is, okay? We all got it. What it is, that thing is, the enemy don't want you to know, is that that's really a secret. That's an extra chromosome of grace, is what I'm going to call it. Extra chromosome of grace. I can't remember how many chromosomes we're supposed to have, but that's extra measure of grace, extra measure of ability. Because see, once you understand that you're different, there's a reason why you're a weirdo. People think you're a weirdo. The thing is, you have to ask God, okay, why am I a weirdo? To use that word. Don't get mad or cry about it or be upset or feel rejected. No. Lord, why am I a weirdo? Why is it that when I go through, I hear these voices? Why is it? And once you realize that you got that extra chromosome of grace, which is God's ability, and you begin to ask God, what am I supposed to do with this ability? What am I supposed to do with this weirdness? What am I supposed to do with this, hearing voices? Okay, I'm hearing voices. I'm slow. I'm not like other people. I'll probably never become president. I'll probably never become, world famous doctor, or whatever the cases that you thought you wanted to be. What's next for me? And He will give you a revelation. He will begin to reveal to you once you realize that I'm a weirdo. God, I'm a weirdo. I'm whatever it is you got. But I'm your weirdo, and I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And once you can rest in that, once you begin to rest in that, say, okay, God, what is the purpose? What is the plan? Give me a strategy. And as you begin to come to embrace your weirdo-ness, if that's a word, once you begin to embrace the fact that you hear voices, once you begin to embrace that there's something going on with you, that there is hope, that there are medications, that there is treatment, right? That you take advantage of it. Now, you don't stay stuck there, because remember, He has come that we might have life and life more abundantly. Once you begin to realize that this is who I am, then you begin to find out, okay, God, you said that I was fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm created for a purpose. And that you want me to have life and life more abundantly. And as you want me to prosper in all areas of my life. Prosper is not necessarily money, but to prosper in all areas of my life. How do I take this weirdness and do that? Okay? For some of you, you may have to take medications the rest of your life. Taking medications the rest of your life allows you to operate in the weirdness that God has for you to the degree that He has. Again, the problem is not the illness, it's how we view ourselves. If we get stuck, if we see weirdness, being a weirdo as being a bad thing, if we see being slow as being a bad thing, it just means that you're different. If you see different as being a bad thing, it just means that I'm unique. It just means that because I'm different, I need extra accommodations. The Holy Spirit has to give me extra accommodations, right? Extra ability. Extra grace, right? So enemy doesn't want you to know there's an extra grace for you, right? Because you're struggling. Somebody gonna help you if you're out there struggling. Somebody, a system is gonna help you. Somebody, you're gonna find things along the way. The Holy Spirit is gonna help you because you're not letting that stop you. See, the enemy would desire to kill our vision, to kill the plan that God has for our lives. He would desire to steal, kill, and destroy. And He does that when we take our eyes off of the ability of God, of Jesus Christ, of the Holy Spirit, and keep it on our inabilities. We'll never, even if you didn't hear voices, even if you weren't diagnosed with schizophrenia, even if you weren't a weirdo, even if your kid did go to Harvard, okay, instead of being on Skid Row. Even if those things happen, right, you would still never, it would never be enough. You would still need God's ability, right? The things I'm telling you, there is a special grace. You know, when you realize, when you tap into the special grace, there's a special grace that comes upon people who need the extra help. And God's grace, I'm using the grace in synonymous with ability. There is an ability, there's a special might that will come upon you. There, you will do things that other people will do, and you realize, well, how did they do that? I was able to do it because of the ability, the spirit of might that came upon me. Okay? You don't know what it cost me to get up to do this. For me, even coming here today, you don't know what it cost me, okay? You don't know what the struggle was for me to do this, right? And I'm talking about me, myself. When I was coming here, I was like, I'm not going to, I just don't have it in me to do it, right? I just don't have it in me. Just didn't have it in me to do it, right? And I said, if I do it, I'll probably, give a message and do something 15 minutes. I don't even have any notes here. But the word persistence. Okay, I had to persist, right, and to do it. So where some people say, "Oh, she all over the place." That's because I don't have any notes. But you know what I'm talking about. Rerun the tape. You'll get it. You have to listen to it. But the thing is, sometimes that's what it is. But because of the persistence, there are at least one or two of you that are going to understand what I'm saying. There are at least one or two of you that, despite my talking fast, despite my accent, you're going to be able to get what I'm saying. And it's to those one or two of you that are going to get the word and it's going to move forward. There are one or two of you that's going to be released from the things that I'm saying. Because there's only one or two that I was sent to. Okay? So the thing is, that's what happens. The ability of God, the grace of God, that extra strength has come upon me that I think I'm here now. I don't know how long. I know I'm over an hour. Okay? And doing this with no notes. And I'm still going. Okay? With no notes. Still going on. And I know I'm at an hour. And my plan was just do this for 15 minutes, just give you the new website. Why? Because I needed that extra ability of grace. I needed that extra ability. And when you step out, whether you stuttering, whether you... I have friends, like I said before, who are doing broadcasts and have nonprofits. They still hear voices. They still take their medications faithfully every day. Sometimes they may battle with thinking about killing themselves or dying by suicide, but they still keep moving. And as they keep moving, that ability, that spirit of grace will come upon them. So you have no excuse. Okay? You have no excuse. Don't let the fact that people say that you're weird stop you. Yes, you are weird. Embrace, thank God I'm weird. Because there's an anointing that will come on the weird people. There's an anointing that will come on the people who are... People think there's something wrong. Oh, there's something wrong with you. Yeah, there is something wrong with me. Yeah, I am a weirdo. Embrace it. Okay? That yes, I am special. I do ride the yellow bus or the short bus or whatever the bus is. Embrace that. And as you begin to embrace that and lift that up to the God, say, God, this is who I am. Endow me with your extra ability. And as you move out in faith and the things that God has for you to do, because you still got something to do. You still got a work to do. He didn't create you here for nothing. Okay? Your symptoms, the things that make you feel like a weirdo, what do you call it? Whatever you got going on with you is designed to kill, steal, and destroy the vision that God has for your life, and is designed to stop you. He wants you to feel so weird that you don't open your mouth. He wants you to feel so stupid that, as you're talking, you lose your words. You don't even know what you're saying sometimes. And people looking at you laughing. That's all designed to get you to stop. That's all designed to get you to give up. But don't give up. Keep moving. If you have to, start somewhere. If you got to take one step, be faithful with that one step. As faithful as you can be with that one step. Don't let people tell you what their measure of faithfulness is for you. Because they don't know that because of your symptoms, you were in bed all weekend. Right? That you struggle. You got off from work Friday, or first of all, got up Friday morning and was smiling that entire day. Nobody knew how close you were to the edge. Nobody knew how close you were to giving up. Nobody knew how close you were to driving your car off of the bridge. But you kept going. Nobody knew. All you can say is, God help me. God help me. You don't even know how you made it. But how you doing? How you doing? Oh yeah. People come to you and they have conversations with you, but they never think to ask you how you're doing. They don't even give you a chance to tell you to tell them how you're doing. They don't know. They don't know the struggle. That as soon as you get off home from work that Friday night, you're in bed all weekend. Okay, they don't know the struggle. You may have started, to plant flowers, and you may say your goal is to plant a flower every day, right? Because that helps you. But symptoms may get to you. You may be so depressed, maybe so anxious at that moment, and you may not be able to only plant a flower every month. And let me back up again here. Those of you who have been diagnosed with the illness, you know that there's certain strategies that we use, right? That you have to use. Certain strategies we may say in treatment, one of the things, find something you like to do and try to do it daily or do it once a week, right? You may like to write. It could be journaling. Some people like to journal. Some people like to read. Or whatever your thing is, you do it because it gives you a sense of purpose. Well, there may be days or weeks when you're supposed to be journaling and you don't have the strength to journal, the emotional, the psychological strength to do it. Don't beat yourself up. This is what I'm saying. Your faithfulness, okay, is not necessarily in how many times you do a thing. Your faithfulness is not how well you do a thing. That's not your faithfulness. Because see, remember, the Word of God said Abraham, when you talk about Abraham was not, I wouldn't say a real stand-up guy, so to speak, when you look at some of the things that he did. But he was deemed faithful. Not because he did a lot of faith-filled things. They said he just simply believed God. Not because he did everything right. Right? But he became the father of faith. He became the father of faith because he believed God. You don't get, a check mark. Because see what happens, the enemy will get us to get in this competition. Right? We're in this competition with our thought process of how things should be. And we're trying to live up to our expectations of how things should be. Okay? Faithfulness means I'm doing something I said I was going to do it every day. I don't feel like doing it every day. I don't have the strength to do it every day. So now I'm beating myself up again now. See, I'm a loser. No. Faithfulness is not how many times you do a thing necessarily. And again, I'm talking to people, again, who are dealing with a severe mental illness, whether you're a loved one or a family member or some type of mental illness or some type of illness. Okay? Because if you're not in that category, you may not get me. And I hear you talking back to me, well, no, faithfulness is when you do something every day. And that's true. And maybe, I'm not necessarily saying it correctly. But I want you to understand your faithfulness is not the fact that you're doing something every day. Your faithfulness is in Him. Your faithfulness is your trust and your confidence in Him. Your faithfulness is accounted. So as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. You already got a check mark when you thought it in your heart, even though you never did it. Right? When you did it, because see what the Lord is looking at, the fact that your will, your persistence, you're persistent in spite of everything that you're going on in your mind, in spite of the fact that you're thinking about driving your car off the bridge. There's a part of you that as you're thinking about this, there's a persistence, there's a fight, there's a spirit that's rising up in you that's saying one more day. One more chance. You may not say it like that, but it's something that's coming on in you that's saying, just keep going. I'll try it again. You may not even say it, but it's the Spirit that causes you to do that. That's your faithfulness. That's the Holy Spirit. That's that extra measure of grace. That's that, chromosome of grace. That's that extra ability. That's where it's coming from. You don't even know where it's coming from, because for you it's over. I just can't do this anymore. I'm about to give up. I'm done. Okay? And you're driving, you're about to go over the bridge, and something catches your attention. Okay? A thought catches your attention. Somebody in the middle of the street, something stops you, and you don't even know what that is. That's that extra chromosome grace. That's God's ability. Say no. What's in you? I'm gonna activate that thing that's in you. So the thing is, when you talk about faithfulness, when you're living with a mental illness, when you're living with any illness that causes you to feel like that you're going to give up, or dealing with any, you feeling like you're a widow, or feeling like you're special, you should be on a special bus, or whatever the things that's causing you to feel bad, okay, is that extra, keep moving, keep going, be faithful, and you be faithful. And you're moving forward. And your faithfulness, though, is not going to look like other people's faithfulness who may not have never ridden a short bus. You're accounted. God is going to judge you or grade you based on your abilities, not on somebody else's. He's going to look at your abilities, the things that you're going through, and how well you are a good steward over the ability that He's given you. Not the ability He's given someone else. He's going to look at what do you do with what He's given you. Okay? Yeah, you hear voices. That's fine. Like God is saying, okay, you hear voices. Okay? There are a lot of people who hear voices diagnosed with schizophrenia who are dealing with severe and persistent illnesses, and they're running marathons. So the problem is not your symptoms. Okay? So let's not use that as a crutch. Okay? It may slow you down, but it doesn't have to stop you. So what is slowing you down? What is keeping you from moving forward? Is not the symptoms, because you can ask God, give me a strategy. That strategy which includes medications. That strategy includes prayer. That strategy includes fasting. That strategy may include seeing someone. Because what it is, you don't want to reject the tools that God has already given you, and because you want the other tools. I don't want this. I want this. I don't want to dip. You know, the prophet told me to dip in the this particular pool. I don't want to dip in this dirty water because it's nasty. I want to go to, you know, the blue waters of whatever, the blue water pond, where it's nice and clean. How dare you tell me that I should go in this muddy water? But His anointing, the ability, His healing was in that muddy water. Okay, so the thing is, you may not want to take medication. You may not want to be classified as someone that's diagnosed with an illness, whatever it is. But if that's the reality, then that's the reality. When you accept the reality, what is, then you can get the revelation. But if you're so busy fighting what is, and trying to fight against God and trying to make God heal you, I've had people who call me up in prayer. Can you pray for us? And myself and my partner, other partners will call us up and say in prayer, this one lady and had like a serious attitude. I mean, she was going to make God heal her. No, that's not how it works. There's a problem there. There's a problem between you and God. Something going on there. I don't know what it is. Okay? So, again, there is anointing on persistence. There's a special grace on people who stutter. There's a special grace. Because for you if you listen to me from the beginning until now, and you listen all the way through, you are anointed to hear me. Okay? There's a special grace. There's a special ability that comes on people who ride the short bus. Once you realize it, there's a special ability, anointing that comes on people who are considered weird, who are considered special, who are considered, you know how we say something wrong with him or something wrong with her. There's an ability, because God has to help you. Who else going to help you? If God doesn't help us, who else is going to help us? Right? So that's that grace, that is special ability. We just have to call upon it. We just have to say, God, help me with your special ability, because you know, the way I talk, I'm going to need all your help. I'm going to need angels, Gabriel, and everybody, right? There's a special ability that comes upon you. And God, there's a strategy, there's a plan for your life. Again, I'm telling you, this was supposed to be in 10 minutes, but I'm going to cut this up. And when I cut it up, I may not cut it up. I just may just put it, it'll just be a long broadcast. But anyway, this has been Sister A. Arnetta Legree. It's Getting Better all the time, mental health outreach. Post Office Box 7432, Silver Spring, Maryland 20910. Please email me at IGBATT, the number 1 at AOL.com. I would love getting emails. I would love getting letters. We like to get those. Post Office Box 7432, Silver Spring, Maryland 20910. Log on to our website, IGBATT.com. We also have IG. MHO.org, which is longer, but if you go to IGBATT.com, it'll take you to our outreach. Again, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. Just email me. If you'd like for me to talk about any mental health topic or any topic, severe, it doesn't have to be severe mental illness, but any topic in particular, please let me know. And just to follow up, I started talking about my friend my friend's son who committed suicide. She was persistent to the end. She was persistent in getting him treatment. She was persistent in doing everything that she could. But sometimes it doesn't happen. It doesn't go the way we think it's going to go. And even when it doesn't go the way we think it's going to go, you have to be persistent and not being guilty. Because some of you family members, you parents, you have done all you knew to do. You've been persistent in pursuing, trying to get him treatment. You were persistent in going to the follow-ups to the doctors. You've been persistent in joining different family members. You've been persistent. You spent on your money or your resources. You have been persistent. And even in your persistence, your loved ones still unfortunately die by suicide, or unfortunately they're lost to the streets. You have to know that there's another part to this. That even in your persistence and all that you've done, your loved one there has to be a persistence as well on his or her part. There's a part that they have to play as well. All right? I tell people that living with a mental illness doesn't take away from the fact that a person has a personality as well. Right? You can do everything right, and your loved one still things still don't go well. And you have to be persistent, that when that feeling of guilt hits you, or that feeling of I should have done more, I should have did better. I think we all can say that in hindsight. We can all look at situations that have happened in our lives and think, and say, I should have did it this way, things should have been better. But we don't have hindsight at the moment. At the moment, you have to be persistent in telling yourself, I did all that I knew what to do. I did all that I could do. And not let guilt beat you up. You can't let guilt, because there's another part to play here. Your loved one also had a part to play. You also had a part to play. Don't beat yourself up. Because your loved one chose to go down a path. That's not a good path. You may not have been the greatest mother. You may not have been the greatest father. But ultimately, it was your loved one's decision to commit that crime that caused them to be in jail. It was your loved one's decision to go down, to take that particular job, to go to this particular school, to marry this particular person. All you can do is pray and support. Ultimately, it was your loved one. It wasn't your fault. You could not have stopped that person ultimately from dying by suicide, because at that moment, that was something that happened that at that moment. Okay, we can learn from it. We can do whatever we can do, but do not beat yourself up. Be persistent in not beating yourself up. Again, it's getting bad all